Welcome in, Loons fans, to another edition of the Matchday Preview. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Manny Lagos. Manny, how are we doing on this fine day? A little cold, but I see you're sporting a nice kit there today.
Yeah, no, we have Jersey Day in the office, which I don't always do, but for some reason I was like, oh yeah. And yesterday, McKenny and Ware, Champions League goals, Americans doing well. We talked all summer about our national team in Pochettino, so I thought I'd throw a little love to them and just go into my little cache of jerseys in my house. So,
for those listening on
by the way,
audio only,
it's freaking cold too.
Yeah.
I want to make sure people realize.
Yes,
this is tough weather.
For those listening on the audio only version, Manny Lagos is wearing an old school Juventus kit. It looks glorious. We are also joined by the Pioneer Press's Andy Greder. Andy, how you doing today? I love the hat, by the way.
Likewise.
Yeah, for again, that's for people just listening in. It's a throwback Minnesota Kicks hat from Talisman Caps. So I just picked it up. I've got a huge head, and this one actually fits my head without just one notch on the back of the reversible hat. So I feel pretty good about myself. Where I don't feel good about is we were all wearing black sweatshirts until Manny busted out his jersey, making us all feel very insecure about what we're wearing now, Jonathan. I feel like I need to go change or something.
I feel like I need to go upstairs and grab one of my off the shelf jerseys that I have just laying around. I feel a little left out now.
Well, you guys got that shot, so.
Manny, what are the other good jerseys around the office? I'm curious.
I've got to look today. When I came in today, I haven't looked. I mean, there's some young people that always have some pretty cool, different jerseys, different kind of like. We have some staff members that even go like off the rack, like old school Polish jerseys, like cool stuff. Yeah, they get pretty creative. Yeah.
Andy, for you, what's the most out of the way jersey you have? Not any top 5 leagues, maybe. What's the most out of the way jersey you have?
The Instagram algorithm paired me with some floral Japan jerseys.
Nice.
So it's like pink and it has like a bunch of floral prints on it. I'll have to send it to you. It's pretty cool. It's got like a black crest. But yeah, for some reason it was Japan that paired me with. I was doing some shopping and I was like, man, I really like that. It's Adidas. Pretty sharp.
Yeah, looks good. Manny?
I mean, I'm going to stick with the Japanese theme only because it ties into, the Thunder did a tour back in '94. We went and played Gambo Sock and Shimizu S Pulse, and I have this orange Shimizu S Pulse jersey that it's long sleeve. Again, it's not quite the Kicks colors, but my brain always goes back to a kid and the Kicks. That's why I reacted when Andy showed his hat today. It's one of my favorites to pull out sometimes, just start wearing. So it's a great shirt. Great
Jonathan, again, Manny just blows us out of the water.
I don't know about
There's
that.
No competing. Like
I know.
No
Why are we even here?
By the way,
different guys, little different careers. So, but yeah,
I know we're awesome. On this show we're reviewing the season. Before we get into that, I just want to review some other things that popped across my social media feed. I don't know if you guys saw this, Andy. If you've seen this, just be quiet for a second. Have you guys seen FB Ref's most viewed player pages of the year per state?
I've seen it by team, and the by team is surprising.
Yeah.
Okay, by team, Minnesota wins that. By state for Minnesota. So good job there, Minnesotans, looking up your own team. Congratulations. Have you seen who the most viewed player in Minnesota is?
No, I missed that one.
I will give you 3 guesses. He does not play in the United States. He plays over in Europe. I'll give you 3 guesses and you're never going to get it, I bet. Andy, first guess.
I mean, it's not Ronaldo. It's not.
He plays in Europe.
Okay.
Is he American?
No.
Pulisic?
I'll narrow it down. He's Italian.
Oh man, I don't know.
It's Federico Chiesa.
What?
He's the only. It's him and Francesco Totti are the 2 Italians on the list for most viewed players in the States. Francesco Totti is the most viewed player in Hawaii. Everyone else is pretty much Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo.
Could you check to make sure that that's not 2014 or 2018 versus 2024?
No, that's this year's.
What year did they win the Euros? Yeah, okay.
That's this year's most viewed players.
The team map is so bizarre because Minnesota's an island where it's MNUFC, and the majority of states it's Arsenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Arsenal's got a
wild.
huge fan base in the US.
It's why I didn't expect it. I mean,
Andy, most of my buddies are Arsenal fans if they're in the Premier League, like almost that era. It must have been the Invincibles, that late 90s, early 2000s, but they are huge Arsenal fans. So
I know that, come election time, the Midwest is mostly red, but that's like coast to coast red. Man.
I just thought that was interesting that Chiesa was the most viewed player in our state, even though Minnesota United was the most viewed team in our state. All right, let's jump right into this. Plenty to discuss here. Before we get into the Loon season recap, let's brief wrap up MLS season at large. Galaxy winning their sixth title 2-1 against New York Red Bulls in Los Angeles. Exciting final in that one. Galaxy go up early. New York Red Bulls fight back a little bit. Couldn't go all the way back. But what was your guys' takeaways from that MLS Cup final and what it meant for the Galaxy? I'll start with you, Manny.
Well, I'm not trying to one up Andy here when we bring up this story.
Easy. You just got to talk.
But I did decide to take a long weekend. It was my anniversary. We went to Laguna Beach. I was not planning on going to the final. My wife woke up and said, "Hey, maybe we should go because we're out here." And so I did end up going to the final there in the stadium. And it was a little bit bittersweet. Obviously, we had the tough result there, and it was a great atmosphere, and Galaxy played really well. And at the end of the day, I was really glad I went because it was actually a really good game. And it was a good celebration for the Galaxy, who I could have told you 3 or 4 years ago, their atmosphere wasn't that great. Their teams weren't making the playoffs. And there was a nice buzz and a nice vibe, and it was a totally different vibe than when you go to an LAFC game. And I think if I put my league hat on, I think it was a good day for the Galaxy and for the league, really, in the end, because you have one of the kind of powerhouses or the powerhouse, the best team historically in the league over the few decades, and they played well. They started out great, and they battled and hung on. I thought it was a game of set pieces for New York, really to find their way back into the game, which they did, and then after that, they made it close in the second half. So it was a good year for the Galaxy. I think we talked a lot about how we were worried about their balance on defense. Watching that game live, sneakily, I thought Garces was the MVP of the game. Maybe Brugman was in there too. He came in for Ricky Puig, provided a different role, but Garces' speed, Yamane, they just really had a great balance to their team and deserved the result in the day for sure.
Andy?
Well, I went down to my living room and had the SEC championship on the laptop, MLS Cup on the TV, just a great atmosphere, ambiance, surrounded by pets. It was just spectacular. I thought it was unfortunate that Puig wasn't able to play. Obviously, they were, such gangbusters against Minnesota, and got past Seattle. I thought it would have been great to see what they could have done if they were as high flying as they were, early on in the playoffs and throughout the year. So I thought the Puig injury kind of took off some of the high flying nature that they had. But it was entertaining to see. I thought, New York Red Bulls continue to fight and show that they were kind of really the underdog story of the entire playoffs, right? You talk about kind of takeaways from the season. It was the fact that they came out of the East and it wasn't, Messi in Miami, or it wasn't Columbus, or it wasn't, Cincinnati. I thought that was probably the most intriguing thing, is the fact that we had an underdog versus kind of a heavyweight fight in the final.
Yeah, and it was as close as it was, considering the two makeups of the side and how they went about their roster builds. I think that's a unique aspect of MLS, and it says a lot of good things about being able to find success with different ways of building your roster instead of just spending all the money in the world. You can find ways to get to the championship and have success with different ways of constructing your roster. And I think that's a good thing. Outside of New York Red Bulls, obviously making the finals, what was your
Jonathan, real quick,
Yeah.
I just want to bring up the Ricky Puig. It's like,
Yeah.
it's a big story. Obviously, they wasn't in the final, but the timing of when he got his ACL, more than likely, he'll be out all of next year. And he is such a fun player to watch. I always tell everybody live, he does not look like a soccer player, but he's really transformed the Galaxy in the league. It'll be fascinating to see what the Galaxy do next year and how they replace that type of creative player, and put the pieces in place to try to kind of repeat and try to kind of continue to be top of the West, and especially as our team included, start to reload. But I do think if we're talking about the West story, that'll be fascinating. Gio Reyna's name came up, and it was a huge controversy because Landon Donovan brought it up, and people were like, "Oh, he should stay in Europe." But it's a nice story in that MLS is now looked upon as like this level where if a player needs minutes, this might be a really good league to be. And I think those kind of stories are actually going to amplify more as we get closer to the World Cup and more of these guys. Matt Turner's another name that comes to mind for me where they're going to need minutes and they're going to need to play. And in the past, I think, MLS might have been a little bit like, nope, it's the level's too low. But now I think it's a really good alternative for some of these guys that might want to get minutes before the World Cup. You will have the other side of it. The snooty soccer snobs are saying, no, he should just stay in Europe. And Atlanta created some big controversy. But I think it is a fascinating story for the Galaxy. How do they replace him next year? And who do they replace him with?
That snooty soccer side's really loving all the rumors coming about Seattle hoarding all the U.S. men's national team players they all despised over the years. I'm certainly going to like Seattle in 2025. Before we jump in, one final question on the season as a whole. Your guys' biggest surprise of the season, take it however you want. Biggest move, biggest transaction, biggest surprising team, biggest surprising player. What was it, Andy? I'll start for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stick with the Red Bulls making the final in the East. I think it was a big deal to see Messi, not make it deep into the playoffs. Obviously, that's what the league wanted, right? Can you imagine what they would have been able to have in Miami, LA in the final with Messi there? I think a real opportunity to bring in casual fans would have been there. So I think that was kind of a downer for the league overall, but I think everyone that's not associated with Miami appreciates that because of all the attention the league puts on Miami. So there's probably a little bit of schadenfreude given the fact that Miami got bounced.
Manny?
I think for me, if I'll quickly stick with the West, I mentioned just the Galaxy in general, their kind of rise back to the top and after 10 years, and again having the most MLS Cups in the history of the league. I think shifting that, I think LAFC's kind of odd identity demise. They still somehow won the West, but it didn't feel like they were as dominant for many, many years, and they kind of lost some identity. So I think in a way, the West feels much more wide open than it ever has actually. Which was kind of exciting for all the teams in the West. And then I think when I think about the East, probably the biggest surprise for me is how good Messi actually was. Going in, I was a little cynical, like, oh, it's going to kind of eat him up. And it did eat him up a little bit with injuries. Excuse me, although that happened in the Copa America, that didn't happen in the league. But he was so good when he was healthy. And then Suarez was so good. And then Alba was had this fun energy. Probably Busquets was the only disappointing one of that group. Gomez was good. So I was really impressed with how good Miami was. And then I was also felt a little bit of redemption that they couldn't quite get it through the playoffs because that's how hard MLS is. And it does kind of rear its head. The other surprise in the East was how good Columbus was for me. Again, I thought they were going to be good. I didn't think they were going to play with that level of soccer for that long of the season. And then my last surprise goes to the East again. It's just the coaching changes. Chicago, New England, Philly, Toronto, so much drama, so much kind of Atlanta's still open. So they're just
New York City
the
FC
coaching
still
carousel
open.
of the East was wild this year.
Yeah, I mean, you still have New York City FC as well in there. A lot of these clubs still open positions, which is surprising, especially with how long Atlanta's role has been open for. It's certainly
Also Philly, right? Jim Curtin
Yeah.
has
Jim
one
Curtin,
down
what a
year and he's
story.
out. I mean, that was maybe the most shocking thing there is just such a standard bearer in the East. He has a down year and see ya. Is he going to go to Atlanta?
You would think, right?
You would think, but to your guys' point, it's been taking a long time. This, yeah, like I said, it really is fascinating. The Jim one is obviously front and center because of how well and how overperforming most people felt he'd been doing, and then one down year,
Right,
gone. And he's Mr. Philadelphia. So that like I said, I think that'll be a fascinating couple months here for how these teams over the next month find head coaches.
Yeah,
I got a question for you
Yes.
guys. As Minnesotans and used to disappointment when it comes to sports, is there any sort of solace in the fact that the team that you lost to wins the championship, or does that not matter because you're upset that you lost or you're mad at them because they beat you? Is there any solace in the fact that the Galaxy went on to win MLS Cup?
I mean, if I'm putting on my MNUFC hat now, I don't not the Galaxy. I think it's probably a little bit like the Timberwolves last year. Like there was an opportunity. I think the three best teams in the league were all in the East this year. Miami, Columbus, Cincinnati, and then you could start the West, you could debate Galaxy, us, LAFC, wherever that falls. So for me, it's more about, you're a couple degrees from an MLS Cup final and potentially MLS hosting an MLS Cup final now when you look back. So for me, it was more just how we could have navigated a little more like Seattle did against the Galaxy that day. I think we could have played like Seattle did. We just weren't quite sharp enough. We had that long break. There's a lot of ways we can make excuses. In the end, the Galaxy not only beat us, by the end of the game, they dominated us. But I still feel like we were much closer than people realized from hosting the MLS Cup.
When I put on my sporting fan hat, I've never seen it as, hey, at least the team that beat us won. I've always wanted that team to lose for some reason. It's just, there's been something that you get into the playoffs, there's always a chance, no matter how good you are. You put yourself in the playoffs, you give yourself a chance. And I've never wanted to be the team that lost to the championship, the team that eventually went on to win the championship. It's always been whenever one of my teams gets as far as they do in the playoffs and they lose, no matter who it is, no matter how they lost, I want that team to lose because I'm still sour that my team lost to them. And I don't want them to have success. And I don't care that it says better on my team that they lost to the eventual championships. I don't know. That's just me. But that also just may be petty version of me coming out. I don't know. What about you, Andy?
I asked Will Trapp that same question, and he gave a very similar answer. I need to drop rationalizing it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. For me,
what's your answer, Andy?
Yeah,
I believe in a sense that, if you lose to the champs, I think that kind of bolsters your resume. The fact that, if they would have gone and lost to Seattle in the final, then I think that 6-2 scoreline looks a lot worse than if they go on and win MLS Cup. I think you can say, well, we lost to the champs. They were gangbusters. They really went on and were great. But again, I think that's just rationalizing because everyone I talk to says, no, get out of town with it. So I'll stop bringing it up.
That's fair. I understand that argument too. It's just, I've always been the more petty, not rational side of it. So let's jump in.
It's more of a competitive thing too, right? I think Will
yep.
was just like, no, of course not. We want to win it.
Yep.
It's like,
Jonathan, I don't see a lot of pettiness from you. So this is good that it's coming out. Really. I like
There's not
let's
usually.
dive into that.
Yeah.
Let's not. Let's dive into Minnesota United season. That's what we're here for, right? The Loons season as a whole. There's a bunch of different ways we can kind of review and look at how this played out. And it's just I know Eric Ramsey has talked about it being 3 different seasons of sorts. You had the early success, you had the middle of the season where everything kind of fell apart and went bad, and then after the Leagues Cup, getting the new guys in, getting a refreshed squad after having essentially a month off with the Leagues Cup break, everything coming together and playing well over the final stretch into the playoffs. So let's jump into it with you, Manny. Overall broad strokes, what was your review and your thinking back now that you've had a couple weeks on the season as a whole?
Yeah, I think the cliche word, coaching word, but it's genuine. I was really excited and hungry now for getting ready for next year, just based on the adversity the club and people and individuals dealt with throughout the year. So I like I said, I don't use that word lightly. I look at it as a former coach, and you've got to really be smart when you use that word, whether you're talking to the media or to your players, or you're internalizing how you're going to compete. And at the end of the day, the adversity of the front office changes in leadership and trying to navigate a timeline that doesn't quite fit with the league schedule, to a surprising start and then a precipitous decline where everybody in the league thought, yeah, this is what we thought, this is what's going to happen, to kind of really the group galvanizing, the club galvanizing, and really trying to finish strong. And we did. And we looked really like a team on the rise by the end of the year. So I just love how we dealt with the adversity of the year. And I think if we can use and take lessons from that to help us get better next year, which we will, I'm really excited about next year.
Andy?
Yeah, I think if you look back 12 months ago, I think at this point, a year ago, Minnesota United was on its second interim manager at this point, right? Wasn't really known who was going to coach the team. Khalid was hired, but when was he going to be able to arrive? It was initially thought maybe he's going to be in the summer. When is he going to be able to get here? What's going to happen with this team? So to be able to fast forward 12 months and know you've got a sporting director, know you've got a young, bright coach, come off a playoff berth and a playoff run and see some improvements in the squad from a talent standpoint, especially at number 9 and Kelvin Yeboah, who you can look at and say, I think that's the striker of the future for this team. I think there's a lot of things to be encouraged about. Also, just kind of an identity, right? I think that's what Ramsey, I think, deserves a lot of credit for, right? He came in mid-season and established a defensive identity, and that's what the team rode to the playoffs in a lot of respects. So I think you have an identity shift, you have success, you have building blocks in the front office and the coaching staff and on the field. And I think it's, a big success to what this team was able to do over all the uncertainty they had a year ago, December.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look back at this season, there's, as we said, there's three different seasons. It feels like the start of the season was decades ago at this point, with how this season kind of morphed and played out in front of us. And when you look at it starting over at the beginning, that fast start provided us kind of a glimpse at the future of what some of these guys could be. You had the fast starts by Josef Rosales in a new role for him. You had Tani Oluwaseyi bursting onto the scene, and that provided some spark and some hope for, oh wow, there's something here special that could grow given the time and energy. And I think that fast start allowed fans in the club to see some guys that maybe we hadn't seen in the past or haven't been able to see in the past in certain roles that kind of showed their strengths, Manny.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's if to start with the although you mentioned players, I think to me Andy alluded to it. Let's start first with there was a definitely a shift and an evolving of tactics, substitution patterns, systems that we hadn't seen a lot this year, and then systems within a game, of changing in tactics, particularly, throughout the year. I think settling on that 3-4-2-1 in the end was probably his most preferred kind of lineup, with Yeboah at top of that, and then Pereira and Robin underneath, and then you've got Will and Trapp and Asani as a double pivot, Bongi and Joseph, and then our back three of Harvey, Boxall, and Diaz. And it was really impressive how well we did defensively with that group for a large spell of that second half, particularly that 6-week run that helped us get into the playoffs and get a 6th seed, which was outstanding way to finish the season. So I think individually, it's just kind of cool. You see Harvey was a center midfielder. He became a center back. That was outstanding kind of stuff. Like you said, Joseph really solidified being an outstanding left wing back and or left back if we go to a back four. Bongi really embraced that kind of wing back role. I think what I'm excited about is those guys individually now, I think are going to be even better next year. I think are going to be more comfortable, but maybe with the defensive shape, and now Bongi contributing like he did last year offensively. Robin and Pereira getting to know each other and almost being 2 number 10s. That gets me excited. They're both quality players. I think Pereira will be getting a little bit more physically better. I think he's going to have a little bit more impactful physical on the game. And I think Robin is kind of in his golden era. We saw it last year. His touches, his movement, his brain are top echelon of the league right now. So a lot of things to look at and a lot of challenges that became positives that get us excited for next year.
Absolutely. When you look back at the season, obviously the story was Eric Ramsey getting his first head coaching role and taking over and developing along the way, growing along the way. Andy, when you look back at what he did this season, what are some of the biggest things you learned about Eric Ramsey from the outside looking in, from your perspective in the media? What are the things that you learned about Eric Ramsey as he grew into this role as the Minnesota United manager?
I would say kind of from the jump is he talked about wanting to create a defensive identity, and that never left, right? It was always that was the focus from day one about who he was and what he wanted to do. And that never wavered. He didn't get too high or too low based on the results. Obviously, when things went awry in the summer, he chalked it up to the reasoning, right? I also think as we talk about this team and the year overall, we're not mentioning the fact that Emmanuel Reynoso was the star number 10 going into the year, right? And he went AWOL, and they kind of managed that in a way of, if you're not a part of this, then if you don't want to be here, then we're willing to move on. And I think that given the success that they had after that and how they weathered that situation, and how it's not even a talking point for us, we have to try to force ourselves to remember that, just shows how smooth everything went with the new leadership. To Manny's point, I mean, how flexible he was with players, right? Asking guys to play in different positions, right? Carlos Harvey as a center back was not something that I could see coming when I went to MNUFC 2 games and I saw a guy that, maybe wasn't making an impact at that level. So I think the ability to do that with him and Sangbin and Bongi at wingbacks, Joe at wingback, I think it showed thinking outside of the box and what are their skill sets that might make them better to be, what's a position that has a higher ceiling for them, right? And I think you can see that with Joe, especially. So yeah, just kind of a flexibility and a focus on themselves and not getting worried about what the other team is doing, just focusing on their principles. I think it was interesting going back to the first part of the season when Cam Knowles was leading them and just the comments from the players about the level of communication that they had on what their roles were going to be was very refreshing in interviews with them, something that they didn't have very much of in the past. A more focus on watching video and analyzing things in the classroom was something that they mentioned. And obviously Ramsey did all of those things to an even more higher degree once he came aboard. But I think you could start to see that sea change in preparation with Cam Knowles and Ramsey continued it over what Adrian was doing previously.
The holidays are here, and that means it's time to get gifting. Get your hands on MNUFC's Holiday Hat Pack this festive season to give that special Loons fan in your life a spot at the first 2 games at Allianz Field in 2025, along with the limited edition Waffle Knit Loons hat. Visit MNUFC.com/holiday pack for more information on how you can win your gift giving this year. From the inside, Manny, what are the things that you learned about Ramsey throughout the season as it progressed?
That, I say this with trying to give the biggest compliment. He was still a first-year coach who approached things with the maturity of somebody who wasn't a first year in terms of just not panicking, but always curious, always hungry to learn, always hungry to question in the right way, which was about how are we going to get better? How am I going to think about my own personal growth, the team growth? Really never making excuses or, it's truly amazing when you think about somebody coming from Manchester United. And I can't think of a time that he said, well, we did this at Manchester United. I mean, you have one of the biggest clubs in the entire world. You have somebody who just worked there, and his sole focus was on Minnesota United, on our growth as a club, his personal growth within that element, and how curious he was as a first-year coach, but also confident and belief in terms of building into the things that really define him as a coach. So it was a really fun joy on the inside to kind of see that all evolve. And it was kind of surreal to see a 32-year-old be that mature and handle. I brought up adversity because there was so much adversity. There is every year, but handle the adversity of all that stuff so well. And I just piggyback on Andy's point. I think the guys really related well to him. Obviously, there's an age similarity for some of our older leaders, but also just the game and evolving tactics of this sport move so quickly. And I think there was a hunger for a lot of our players to really come to work every day and get excited about being involved a little bit more in those evolving tactics and how that can help them become a better group on the field.
Absolutely. Kind of the same question here now, taking the focus off of Eric Ramsey, looking at the team, and this may be kind of where you guys were going with some of these answers. What's the thing you learned about this team as it progressed? I know there's so many different players. Andy, you brought up the point that Emmanuel Reynoso came in. We came into this season thinking that he would be a star if he showed up. Only got 31 minutes out of him this season and still found a way to get to the conference semifinals. And I think if you had told people that going into the season, knowing what they knew then, that you were only going to get 31 minutes out of Emmanuel Reynoso and you were still going to get to the conference semifinals, people would have grabbed that as fast as they could and run to the bank with it. What were some of the things that you learned about this team as it progressed and as new faces came in, old faces left, and all the different machinations of how this squad played out throughout the season, Andy?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of the same core, right? I think you need to take your cap off a little bit to what the previous regime did in a roster build, right? Because a lot of the same guys were the main people that led the team currently, right? Robin, Boxy, Dane, Hassani, Will, a lot of the guys that were on that Adrian Heath and Mark Watson brought in were key guys. So there was a foundation, and that foundation is what you still see today, right? Obviously, the guys they added in the summer, and Perea and Diaz and Yaboa are, headliners at two DPs and a starting center back. But the majority of the protected list we saw for the expansion draft was guys that were already on the team. So I think there was a foundation that is still continuing on with this team. So it's a lot of continuity as well.
Manny?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a reason why we've made the playoffs 5 of the last 6 years, and I think there's a lot of people in this club that have worked hard to roster build.
Yeah.
Frankly, from day one of MLS to get into that great competitive year in the first year in Allianz Field where we finished fourth, and I think that was another year we felt like we're gonna have a really good playoff run, and then we had it in the COVID year, which is a little bit different. And yeah, I think there's an elevation of the kind of core players. If we're debating for sure, I thought it was a bounce back year for Boxall. I thought he was much better than last year. And he was a great leader. I thought it was a much better year for Will Trapp than last year. So, I give credit to all of us in the past who built this, but I also give credit to the new regime who kind of saw and brought out the personalities of some of these guys that maybe had a down year. Dane St. Clair, I thought this was a huge bounce back year for him from last year. I think his play was elevated. Whether that's their own individual focus or whether that was because the group culture was better. That's always why we have these great debates. Joseph, I thought, had a way better year than last year. So there was a lot of these core players that I think within the system that Eric and the new regime brought in and Khaled kind of implemented as well. I think elevated some of these guys. I debatable. The only one I think for me maybe dipped just a little bit was Bongi. He was probably the one player I would say we've got to get him back up to a level where he was 2 years ago. But all the other kind of veteran guys, I think, really stepped up. And then the pieces we've added that were mostly the starting pieces out there, particularly Calvin Yaboa, have been outstanding. I mean, great. And I get excited about Diaz. I get excited about Pereira. Diaz is a little bit different. I think he learned a big lesson in that LA Galaxy game. That was probably his worst game for us, the Manchester United jersey. But he's shown that he could be a potential really capable starter in this league. I think Joaquin Pereira is only going to get better. I think, like I said, I think this was kind of one of those guys who I think he learned a lot in this short stint. And by next year, he's going to be fully a Minnesota United player who's going to have some real creative, impactful touches on the field. So long story short, that's where we are. That's why I'm excited is we do have a core of players that are kind of in their prime, maybe even waning prime for some of the older guys, but they're still hungry to contribute to the team.
For sure. And you look at some of these guys that you have mentioned as the standout, you guys have mentioned as standout players, Robin Lod, 7 goals, 15 assists, MLS All-Star, probably maybe had the shout and should have been the comeback player of the year, but Lewis Morgan won that one.
Stick with it, Jonathan. Let's keep it going. Yep.
You guys are making me tap into that petty side again.
Bias.
You guys are making me tap into the petty side. I don't like that. Michael Boxall, as he said, resurgent year, kind of anchoring the center three of that the 3 center back system under Eric Ramsey. Josef Rosales establishing himself as one of the better left wing backs in the league, I would say. Who are some of the unsung heroes for you guys? I know you mentioned, Andy, Carlos Harvey popping in about halfway through the season after some performances in MNUFC 2. For me, I think he was one of the best signings of the offseason coming in. You see him as one of the guys who comes in the offseason. You're like, okay, this guy had some good moments with Phoenix Rising last year. What can he provide us in depth? And he became a solid starter for this club throughout the season.
I would say the revolving door at right back, right? I think everybody that had to try to play there, right? I think Sangbin, Bongi especially, the fact that those guys go from attacking places to a wing back spot, I think it can be difficult for them to buy in and realize that that's how they're best going to be able to impact the team. I'd throw Caden Clark in there. He had to do it for a little while. DJ Taylor, did it as well. Matus Komet, I think we're still waiting to see if he can be a player on this team or not. And if they go back to the transfer, I almost said transfer portal. You can tell I'm covering college football right now. I just got out of the transfer portal
for the next couple months. So.
So I just take off the hat to everybody who played right back, who tried to contribute on this team, the unsung guys, the guys that, might have struggled and might have got passed over, and Sangbin and Bongi, who I felt like kind of tried to embrace it. I think it was funny at one point during the year when Sangbin had a good game and there was some chatter in the locker room about, he's not a right back. He's not a right back. It's kind of some of the guys in there kind of, giving him a hard time and kind of showing the fact that he was doing something that maybe even he didn't think was his best spot.
Manny, your unsung heroes for the season?
I've tried to speak passionate about a lot of the guys, because I think the group to me was kind of the heroes for the club in terms of the uncertainty of where we were and trying to make sure we felt like we were evolving to a competitive season. So I've already mentioned Dane, Joseph, Boxel, Bongi, Lode, obviously Apoa, Diaz, Pereira. Those are always like the easy ones. Hassani had an up and down year that's finished really up. And he is somebody that, has, people don't realize he's still recovering. I relate to him. ACL injuries are massively hard to recover, and sometimes it takes a couple years, and people think you should be just good again right away, or after 12 months or after 15 months. I think his second half of the year was unsung hero-ish in terms of like the type of player and type of battle mentality we're going to need for the future of the team. I like that Andy kind of said right backs, although I think that might be a negative for us, if I'm being honest. Like I'd look now, if I'm trying to be honest, I don't think we could have. We sometimes need to go to a back four maybe to get some possession and be a better ball possession team. So I think Kamut's offseason is a big deal for us. We got to figure out if we can get him to a level that we feel like he is now an impactful player on our team. I really think there was some nice unsung heroes that maybe didn't start, the Devin Padelfords, the Luke Wazavis, or their ability to step in at key moments and provide big minutes and really try to get the vibe of, we're going to give young players minutes and do it and not have us drop off a cliff was great to see. I really, really like that. I think that's going to continue for the club to say, listen, we've got to figure out a way to still win, but also give these young guys who are talented minutes to see if they are going to be future starters for the team. I don't know. I mean, the group was the unsung hero for me there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout as well. I mean, when you look at some of the names that pop up on the roster that played minutes for this squad, when it brings back the fact that Kervin Arriaga was a star for this team early on in the season, and then he was sold midway through the season. You were thinking, who's going to step in and fill in that role? Carlos Harvey pops into that role, and for me, he's one of the unsung heroes that doesn't get enough. I think he gets a lot of praise, but I don't think he gets enough for what he was able to do and transform himself into a regular starter in MLS. When you brought him in the offseason, you thought he might have just been a depth piece, a depth signing, and he really solidified himself as a starter for this club. All right, we've talked about.
Hey, by the way, I also we brought up Eric Ramsey with the Harvey. I think he did a great job with Sangbin this year too, because Sangbin wasn't quite playing at a level of a starter in terms of it being impactful, whether it was goals or assists or possession. So I think his decision making to kind of give him a break on the bench and become almost like a super sub, I think really turned his year around and got him to relax a little bit and try to be a little bit more impactful at the things that he's really good at versus trying to like start him every game and see if he can get an output because he's super fast and he's got good technique. So I thought he did a great job with kind of evolving a good young talent and using not always playing as a way to give him an opportunity to kind of grow and evolve as a player for the year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you see just his statistical output goes from 1 goal to 6 goals. Now there's a little bit more time played in that second season, but having that depth and growth and ability to just come off the bench and play within himself showed some growth from him and some potential from a guy that you ended last season thinking, is this guy really going to work out? Is things going to develop for him? And he actually did develop throughout the season. And you go into next season hopeful for what he can put on the field next year. We've talked about all these players that have done well. So now the hard question, your MVP for the season. Manny, I'll start with you.
Oh, no way. Start with the reporter on this.
I think it's
Andy.
Robin Lod. I think it's
Robin
Robin Lod. I don't even think it's close, to be honest with you. I think you look at his goals and assist production. I think the fact that they lost Reynoso, the fact that he was a conduit to be able to combine and create, was very important for this team, to be able to bounce back, to be a veteran type leader for this team, even if it's kind of in his unspoken kind of way. I think it's probably him. Yeah, I mean, other candidates, maybe, I don't know. Who else is kind of, I think it's
maybe Dane. I mean, Dane.
Yeah, maybe a level below. Yeah, maybe a Dane. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about that game Dane had in the Leagues Cup, you think about the playoff run, you think about, his,
Yeah.
he really was, I think, like from a data analytics, top 5 goalie in the league this year versus last year, he was down a bit. So, but I think you're probably right. It probably is Robin in the end, particularly given the Reynoso kind of situation and how he had to step up and give us that creative flair and leadership in a different way. So I think it's a good shout out. Are we missing anybody, Jonathan, in our list?
I would think I would maybe give some love to Josef Rosales for what he did at the left back position, kind of solidified that side of the field and what he was able to do. But yeah, I think I agree with you guys. Robin Lod, Dane St. Clair, easy shout outs for that. Dane St. Clair ending the season with 7 clean sheets, and most of those coming in the latter half of the season when they really needed some defensive solidity to step up, and he absolutely stepped up in big ways, earning himself probably a good shout at being the candidate #1 going forward. We'll see how that plays out for him.
Hey, by the way, if it was the first 5 games of the year, it would have been Tani for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, I think Tani was great all year because his role kept on changing. And he had to find his way to kind of find minutes, particularly with Yeboah coming in. It's another one I want to give a shout out to, like just a young, mature forward who's still trying to find his way. And, he really embraced whatever role Eric threw at him. And given how well he started the year, that's not easy to do, what he did this year. But yeah, after 5 games, it would have been Tani, but I'm probably right. Probably Robin Lod.
Yeah, especially when you needed someone to take up the mantle of the goal scoring or being the goal scorer for this team and the offensive outlet for this team. Tenny Oluwaseyi stepping up in a big moment, coming back off an excellent loan in San Antonio last year and starting the season incredibly hot and earning himself some minutes with Canada and putting himself clearly in the minds of the future, hence why he got the contract extension for the club. And it'll be interesting to see how he develops in his role next season. Is Dane St. Clair's 16 saves in Leagues Cup in that one game the moment of the season for you guys, or is there something else that sticks out to you guys for the moment of the season, Andy?
I would say it's either that or the playoff PKs against Real Salt Lake. I think both of those back-to-back, those games. Dane, again, to Manny's point, I mean, he was tremendous, a showman, really a lot of drama in those ones. I thought those were great to witness and to experience and to have at Allianz Field for the second one. So it's either the Leagues Cup 16 saves, which was just spectacular because he was, they went down to 10 men and were just facing a barrage. So either that one or the RSL PKs.
Manny?
Yeah, I think from an individual standpoint, I think the PKs probably are both. I agree. I think both those are awesome. Like I said, I think from a group standpoint, my brain goes to I love the fact that the team stepped up on Eric Ramsey's first home game, that 2-0 win against LAFC.
Oh yeah,
one of more special nights. We actually had an outing for corporate partners into the Charlotte game, and that was a great dominating road performance. That my brain now goes to all of our road performances this year were probably the best in the history of the club. You can confirm that, Jonathan, or not, but that 4-1 St. Louis win at home, I loved a lot. Thought that was a great result as well. So a lot of good group stuff. I think individually, you got to look at Dane for sure, either that Leagues Cup or the shootouts.
Yeah,
I'll throw that Colorado game in late in the year. I think that one was, especially because Colorado was so high. I mean, that was maybe the full throttle Minnesota, especially in possession. I think that was maybe one of their best possession games. The chances, as we look forward, I think like you mentioned, Manny, possession numbers have to improve with this team.
Yeah.
I think that has to be something. Home form absolutely has to improve
Yep.
as well. You can't rely on 27 road points every year. So yeah, that's kind of a tangent, but yeah, I'd throw in that Colorado game as another highlight.
That was going to be my next question for you guys, is what you're looking forward to most seeing, excuse me, from the club next season as we head into 2025. Manny?
I just think building off of a lot of the things we learned this year, good and bad. Again, I want to be positive. I want to talk about the momentum that was created this year. We have to be honest too, though, that there are some somewhat red flags that came out in some games, particularly in the playoff game, that we're going to have to make sure we're evolving as a team in terms of how we go about winning in the gauntlet of MLS, which is a really tough regular season and playoff time. And I think getting better at ball possession, getting players who are a little bit more hungry to keep the ball when we're winning, or to find the ball when we need to find spaces to get forward and get on numbers to attack. So I think that's going to be a key one. I think I mentioned that means we kind of need some positional stuff. We need to think about how we find right back. So Eric can be more dynamic with deciding whether he wants to play the back four, a back three, a back five, et cetera. And then certainly in the center midfield, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how we navigate getting better. Will be 1 year older. He's had a great year. I think he's got a ton of trust with Eric. I think we've got to find some center midfielders now that are going to be hungry to kind of set the tempo of what Eric's tactics are for the day in terms of whether it's a system or whether it's going to be defend and counter or whether it's going to be we need to keep the ball more and not have the other team have it so much.
Andy?
Yeah, I think to that point, I think they need to get younger at center midfield. They need to get younger at center back. I think those are the two major roster needs that they need to fill this offseason. I look at is there going to be a domino that falls before that to see the kind of levels they can get to, as Teemu Pukki played his last game for Minnesota United, given his DP slot, given his $3.5 million salary. If he were to go this winter, would that create an opportunity for them to sign another designated player? I am concerned about Joaquin Pereira. I think he came off the field in every single game he played in. He was not a guy that you had to keep on the field. I think that is a little bit concerning. I don't think he created enough. When Khalid Elmad spoke to the media a couple of days ago, he talked about him needing to be braver on the ball. I think you need to see a lot more out of him. He also mentioned the fact that he's a convertible DP, so he can come off that spot soon. So that provides another opportunity for them to add a designated player. I think it takes off a little bit of pressure on Pereira as well. I think that comes with being a DP to be a real difference maker. But you need to see more from him for sure, especially as you see Robin also get a year older. So there's plenty of things that this offseason needs to include, as well as including the summer window, because I think it's going to be kind of a staged roster build going into 2025 as well.
Looking forward to all of it. Looking forward to talking about this more as the next season gets closer, which, training camp opens next month already. So it's just around the corner. Looking forward to it, guys. I've appreciated talking to you guys and talking with you guys all season long. Andy, John Marthaler, who this podcast is so aptly named after about midway through this season. Loved having you guys on all throughout the season. Manny, loved talking to you throughout the season. And thank you especially to our production staff of Grace Dearson, Evan Entler, Kyle Hayward, for putting this together every single week throughout the season. Loons fans, big shout out to you for tuning in every week. We'll talk to you next season.